Chapter 1. The Smile in the Library. It was the kind of party where everyone laughed too loudly, drank too little, and watched each other too closely. At the sprawling country estate of Sir Everard Vale, the atmosphere crackled with tension beneath a facade of genteel civility. The chandelier's light shimmered off champagne flutes, and the ticking of an antique long-case clock marked time like the drumbeat of a silent threat. The guests had gathered for what was advertised as a weekend of leisure, a modest affair compared to the grand events of earlier seasons. Sir Everard, once a lion of the city and now a celebrated patron of the arts, had recently turned 70, and was rumoured to be preparing changes to his famously complicated will. That alone might have brought tension to the gathering, but there were other undercurrents, hushed quarrels, jealous glances, and one guest whose very presence had unsettled the balance. Lucian Drake. Tall, silver-templed, and too charming by half, Drake had arrived with a dazzling smile and a reputation for bringing ruin where he tread. He had once been engaged to Everard's only daughter, Julia Vale, before their very public and very bitter break-up. That he had returned, uninvited but somehow accepted, set off a quiet panic among the more conservative guests. No one knew what he wanted, and Lucian, of course, had refused to say. It was Julia who found the body. The evening had wound down into small talk and piano music. Guests retired in waves to their rooms, claiming fatigue or headaches. Julia had gone to the library in search of a particular volume, her father's first edition of the Confessions of Rousseau, when she stopped dead in the doorway. Lucian Drake was seated in the leather windback chair by the hearth, his legs crossed, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow. At first glance, he seemed simply to be resting. Then Julia saw it, the thin trickle of blood on his temple, the unnatural tilt of his head, and the smile. He was smiling. That, more than the blood or the stillness, sent a chill through her bones. By the time the others arrived, drawn by her scream, Lucian Drake was indisputably dead. No weapon was found. The windows were locked from the inside. No signs of a struggle. A book lay open in his lap, The Art of War in French. And still that same terrible smile on his face, as if the last thing he had seen had amused him immensely. Everard, white-faced and trembling, stood staring at the body of the man he had once called a vulture in a waistcoat. Julia clutched a silk handkerchief to her mouth, as the guests gathered like shadows in the doorway. And somewhere upstairs, the old grandfather clock chimed midnight. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The following morning dawned with a pale, anemic light that crept hesitantly through the fog surrounding Thornway Hall. The frost clung to the windows, as if reluctant to release the house from the grip of the previous night's horror. Inside, the mood was subdued. The body of Lucian Drake had been removed under the cautious supervision of the local constable, though no one had dared tidy the library. It stood sealed, a tomb of unanswered questions. At the breakfast table few ate. Tea was sipped without enthusiasm, toast left untouched. Julia Vale sat rigid in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes bloodshot and fixed somewhere far away. Her father, Sir Everard, had aged in the night. He looked every minute of his 70 years, and then some. His normally commanding presence had withered into something brittle, His tremor, which he normally disguised with clever posture, was now impossible to miss. It was just after 10 o'clock when the butler, Merton, entered the dining-room with a telegram on a silver tray. He cleared his throat delicately and approached. "Sir Everard, sir," he said, "a response from Monsieur Poirot." Sir Everard took the envelope with a kind of reverence. The other guests leaned in, though none dared speak. He slit it open and read quickly. "Well?" asked Lady Halbert, who had no patience for suspense. "He is on his way," said Sir Everard, folding the note with trembling fingers. "By motor car, from London. He will be here before noon." A collective breath was held and released. Even in the face of something as unfathomable as murder, the name Hercule Poirot brought a strange reassurance. Though foreign in manner and style, the great detective's reputation preceded him even in the cold halls of English nobility. By 11:45, Poirot's arrival was as dignified and deliberate as one would expect. He emerged from a dark touring car with polished spats and a faint scent of cologne. Despite the cold, his overcoat was impeccably pressed, his moustache waxed to perfection, and his hat angled just so. He paused at the grand entrance to Thornway Hall and surveyed it with interest, then nodded once. "Precisely. I do not like fog," he murmured to himself in his accented English. "It is a deceiver, n'est-ce pas? Everything soft, vague, no clarity. It hides the truth." Merton bowed and led him into the drawing-room, where the remaining guests had gathered like penitents awaiting judgment. Poirot made his way inside, with a calm grace, removing his gloves as he scanned the faces before him. Sir Everard stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough for coming on such short notice." Poirot gave a courteous bow. "But, of course, it is always the duty of Hercule Poirot to aid where the truth is obscured, especially in cases so—" He paused, choosing his word carefully. "Curieux." He turned to face the others. "I ask for a small indulgence. I would like to speak with each of you in turn. But first I must understand who you are." Sir Everard gestured toward the group. "Of course, everyone here was present last night." Poirot stepped forward, addressing the room. "You must forgive me," he said gently, "but I am a man of order. I require things to be laid out with precision. Names, relationships, the facts before the feelings. Oui?" There was a polite murmur of agreement. Poirot gestured towards the youngest among them, a slight man with spectacles and a scholarly air. "You, monsieur?" "Dr. Felix Linton," the man said. "I'm a historian, a guest of Sir Everard's, doing some research on his personal archives." Poirot nodded. "Merci. And you, madam?" "Lady Margaret Halbert," came the crisp reply from a matronly woman in pearls and a steel expression. "Sir Everard and I have been friends for many years. I was a bridesmaid at his first wedding." Poirot turned to a man with a dashing demeanour, his suit rumpled and his expression guarded. "Colonel Geoffrey Standish," he said tersely. I served with Sir Everard in India. We've stayed in touch." "Miss Vale, I presume?" Poirot asked gently, turning to Julia. She nodded silently. "And this gentleman?" The man seated beside Julia rose. He was of medium height, with a sallow complexion and a permanent squint. "Douglas Thane. I'm Miss Vale's fiancé," he said, his tone faintly defensive. Poirot gave a slight bow. "And finally, the staff," Sir Everard responded. "You'll find only 3 under this roof aside from myself and the guests. Merton, the butler, Miss Linley, my housekeeper, and Fenwick, the gardener, though he does not stay in the house." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Très bien. I shall begin with Miss Vale." Interview 1. Julia Vale Poirot and Julia sat alone in the morning room, which looked out upon the mist-covered gardens. Julia had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes still shimmered with unspent tears. "I need to ask you to recall last night," Poirot said gently. "Everything, mademoiselle, however small." Julia exhaled, nodding. "I went to the library to find a book, my father's first edition of Rousseau. I thought it would help me sleep. I opened the door and saw Lucien in the chair. At first I thought he was only resting. You had spoken to him earlier. Briefly, he was, as he always was, insufferably confident. He said he'd come to make peace. I didn't believe him." "Was he invited?" She hesitated. "No, he just showed up. But father didn't want a scene. He let him stay." Poirot nodded slowly. "And how did your fiancé feel about this?" Her lips tightened. Douglas was furious. He never liked Lucien. No one did. "Was anyone close with Mr. Drake?" Poirot asked. Julia paused. "Lady Halbert used to admire him. I don't know why. She said he reminded her of someone from her youth. And Felix, Dr. Linton, seemed fascinated by him. But I'm not sure it was admiration. More like observation." Poirot's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "Observation? That is curious." Interview 2. Colonel Standish. Standish sat stiffly, arms folded. "I had no time for Drake," he said gruffly. "He was a cad. God knows why Everard let him through the front door." "Did you speak with him?" "Briefly. He was sniffing around, trying to stir things up. Said something about unfinished business." Sounded like a threat. Poirot tilted his head. "And where were you when the body was discovered?" "In my room, reading. Heard the scream and came down. Alone, yes." Poirot nodded once. "Merci." Interview 3. Lady Halbert gave Poirot a long, appraising look. "You think I killed him?" she asked cruelly. Poirot smiled faintly. "I think nothing, madam. I observe, I question." She sniffed. "Lucien was a bore. Pretty too, look at, but all ego. I enjoyed our debates, that's all. He liked to shock." "Shock how?" "He hinted that he knew things. Secrets. He was fond of saying that everyone at Thornway Hall had something to hide, including Sir Everard." Poirot filed that away. "And you, madam? What is it you hide?" She smiled thinly. "Nothing you'd be clever enough to find." Interview 4. Dr. Felix Linton. Felix Linton wrung his hands nervously. "This is a dreadful situation, Monsieur Poirot. Dreadful. You knew the deceased?" "Barely. I only met him yesterday. But I was fascinated. The way he spoke, like a man who sees more than he says. He was studying people." "Studying?" "Yes. I got the sense he was provoking everyone deliberately, setting little traps. He even said to me, 'People reveal themselves in anger, doctor, or in fear.' I wrote that down in my notebook." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You took notes?" "Well, yes. I observe behavior. It's part of my research." Poirot leaned forward. Did he speak of your research? He hinted that he'd read some of it, which was odd. My work isn't published, not yet. Then how did he know? I don't know. Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then, would you show me your notebook? Felix hesitated. I'll find it. Interview 5. Douglas Thane. Douglas Thane was a man perpetually on edge, and today he looked positively brittle. I didn't kill him, if that's what you're getting at, he said at once. Poirot raised a brow. I have not accused you. No, but you're thinking it. I hated the bastard. He hurt Julia. He humiliated her. If I'd had the chance, I might have given him a black eye. But murder, that's different. Where were you last night at midnight? In the drawing room, alone, after Julia went upstairs. I needed air. Poirot gave a slow nod. Très bien. Thank you, monsieur. When the interviews concluded, Poirot asked to see the library himself. Sir Everard unlocked the door with an air of dread. The room was untouched. Poirot moved with quiet reverence, observing every detail. The open book in the dead man's lap, the untouched brandy, the angle of the chair, the window latches, the hearth. He knelt beside the fireplace, inspecting the grate. A faint scent lingered. Burnt paper. He turned suddenly. Monsieur, he said to Sir Everard, you spoke of changes to your will? Sir Everard's eyes flickered. Yes, I was planning to revise it. I never got the chance. Did Mr. Drake know of this intent? Sir Everard hesitated. He might have. He had a way of learning things. Poirot gave a small, unreadable smile. Ah, then we must consider. If he knew something he should not, might that knowledge have cost him his life? Sir Everard said nothing. Poirot stepped forward, picked up the book from the chair, and turned to the page Lucian Drake had supposedly been reading. A line was underlined, in pencil. Poirot read it aloud. To appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak, that is the art of war. He closed the book. Murder, Poirot whispered, is never simple, but it is always personal. Chapter 3. Ashes and Echoes. The line underlined in Lucian Drake's book read, The man who smiles too often has secrets that are buried deep. Poirot studied it in silence, the book held gently in his gloved hands, as though it might whisper truths if treated with enough care. Sir Everard hovered nearby, watching the detective with growing unease. This book, Poirot murmured, was not This book, Poirot murmured, was not chosen at random. Nor is this line underlined by accident. No, no. It is the kind of message left by a man who knows his end is near, or suspects it may be. But Lucien couldn't have known, Sir Everard objected. He was arrogant, to the point of delusion. He would never have believed he was in danger. Poirot closed the volume with a soft thump. Perhaps not. Or perhaps he knew precisely the kind of hornet's nest he had stirred. He turned to the fireplace once more. The scent of burnt paper had not faded. Poirot knelt, producing a pair of small silver tongs from his pocket. Delicately, he extracted a blackened scrap from between the coals. Sir Everard leaned in. What is that? A remnant of correspondence, I believe. Poirot examined the fragment. Only part of a sentence remained, half-scorched. Cannot keep silent forever. If you don't, Consequences will be dire." Sir Everard blanched. "Good God!" Poirot rose. "We must speak with your staff, especially the housekeeper and the butler, Merton. They see much and speak little, n'est-ce pas?" Sir Everard nodded grimly. "As you wish. I'll have Merton send Miss Linley to you. Interview 6. Miss Linley, housekeeper." Miss Linley was a tall woman of perhaps 60, with a pinched mouth and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was pristine, her posture rigid. Poirot observed her as she entered the morning-room and sat at his invitation. "Madam," he began gently, "how long have you been in the service of Thornway Hall?" 24 years, sir," she said crisply. "Then you know its inhabitants well. I know their habits, their preferences, their tempers." Poirot nodded. "Were you aware of any quarrels between Mr. Drake and the others?" She hesitated. "He was not a popular man." "Who disliked him the most?" "Miss Vale." "Understandably." Colonel Standish didn't hide his contempt. Mr. Thane seemed ready to come to blows with him by dinner, and I dare say Lady Halberd was more enamoured with Mr. Drake's mystery than his manners. Poirot tilted his head. "Did he seem fearful last night?" "No, sir. Quite the opposite. He seemed amused, as though he were playing a game the rest of us didn't understand." "Did he go out after dinner?" Miss Linley shook her head. "He remained in the library from shortly after 9 until his death." Poirot raised a brow. "You are certain?" "Took him a glass of brandy at 9:30. He asked to be left undisturbed. He was reading." Poirot held up the underlined book. "This?" "Yes, sir. That one." Poirot leaned forward. "And where was everyone else?" "After dinner, most guests retired to their rooms. Mr. Thane and Colonel Standish went to the drawing-room for drinks. Lady Halberd played piano in the music-room. Dr. Linton stayed in the study with his notebook." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "a house of silence, and yet a man ends up dead in the next room." Miss Linley's expression flickered for a moment. Poirot caught it. "There is something you are not saying, no?" She hesitated. Then, "I saw someone slip out into the garden around 11, through the east corridor. I thought it strange at the time." "Who?" "I couldn't say. It was dark. But the figure moved quickly, purposefully." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Très intéressant. Merci, madame." Interview 7. Merton, butler. Merton stood at attention, hands clasped behind his back. A man of few words, his age and posture bespoke a life of discipline. "Merton," Poirot said, "you were present last night when the guests retired." "Yes, sir. I extinguished the lamps just before midnight." "Did you see Mr. Drake after dinner?" "Only briefly. He remained in the library." "Did he speak to anyone? Make any phone calls?" "Not to my knowledge." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And tell me, Merton, is there any hidden way to leave the library?" Merton's brow furrowed. "You mean secret passages?" Poirot gave a mild shrug. "Old houses have their secrets, do they not?" "There is no secret door, but the library has a side entrance that leads to the garden, locked from the inside." Poirot perked up. "Was it locked when the body was discovered?" "I believe so, sir." "But you did not check?" "No, sir." Poirot gave a slight nod. "That will be all for now." After the interviews, Poirot took a long walk through the estate, grounds. The garden path was damp with frost, and the fog had begun to lift slightly, revealing twisted hedges and skeletal trees. Near the eastern corridor, he paused and bent low. There, in the soil beneath a bay window, were faint impressions, footprints. Examined them closely. One set, smaller than average, light tread, and nearby, something glittered in the soil. A cufflink. Poirot picked it up delicately with his handkerchief. It was gold, monogrammed. Not initials, but a symbol. A coiled serpent. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly. A serpent sheds its skin to grow, but sometimes it leaves behind more than it intended. That afternoon, a revelation. Poirot requested that all the guests reconvene in the drawing-room. They arrived one by one, uneasy under his scrutiny. He stood by the hearth, the cufflink hidden in his pocket, his expression unreadable. "I thank you all for your cooperation," he began. "I now believe I understand more than I did this morning. A picture begins to form, though some brushstrokes remain incomplete." There was a rustle of discomfort. Poirot continued, "I have two questions. Firstly, who among you entered the garden last night near 11? No one spoke. Poirot's eyes swept the room. No one? Then I must assume the figure I saw in the mud, who left behind a very specific cufflink, has a reason to remain silent." Julia Vales stood abruptly. "A cufflink. Whose?" Poirot held up the item. "Perhaps the person will volunteer before I make inquiries into each guest's wardrobe." Douglas Thane paled. "I've never seen that before." "Of course you have," Colonel Standish snapped suddenly. "You wore that set at the club last month." Thane spun toward him. "That's a lie." Poirot's eyebrows lifted, but he said nothing. Julia turned to her fiancé. "Douglas, is it yours?" He looked away. "I lost one, some time ago." Poirot nodded. "Ah, the truth leaks out like a cracked teacup, yes?" Thane clenched his fists. "I didn't kill him. I only went out for air. He saw me in the library and made some crude comment. I told him to go to hell and walked out to the rose path." Poirot stepped forward. "And what did he say?" "He said, 'You can marry her, but she'll always wonder if it should have been me.'" The silence that followed was heavy. Poirot folded his arms. "So, you were provoked. You left. Yet he ended up dead." Thane growled. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot raised a placating hand. "I accuse no one. I only gather the facts." He turned now to Felix Linton, who had gone pale. "Dr. Linton, did you find your notebook?" The man swallowed. Yes. May I see it?" He handed it over. Poirot flipped through it quickly, stopping at one entry from the night before. "Chin, 44 p.m. Lucien Drake said, 'The will is just the surface. What's buried below the ink?' That's what matters." Poirot read the line aloud. Everyone stiffened. Sir Everard took a step forward. What did he mean by that? Poirot looked up. I believe he referred to an older will. One he discovered. No, Halbert muttered. Impossible. The only will Everard has is the one his solicitor filed last year. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Unless, of course, Mr. Drake discovered one written earlier. One that changed everything. He turned to Sir Everard. Was there ever such a document? Sir Everard hesitated, then sighed. Yes, years ago.
before Julia was born. It left everything to my brother's line, but that version was destroyed long ago, or so I thought." Poirot's voice was calm. "Then I suggest we search Lucien Drake's room. If he intended to use an old will to blackmail his way into fortune, he may have hidden it somewhere close." Discovery in the guest room. Poirot led the search personally, and within an hour a folded parchment was discovered beneath the lining of Drake's suitcase. It was the original will, dated, sealed, and still bearing Sir Everard's signature. Poirot held it up. He had leverage, and he intended to use it. But someone with everything to lose, ensured he never would. The guests stared in silence. Poirot looked at each of them, his gaze piercing. "I now know who killed Lucien Drake," he said softly. "But knowing is not the same as proving." His eyes paused on one face. "I will wait until tomorrow. If the truth is not revealed voluntarily, then I shall reveal it myself." He turned and left the room. Chapter 4. The Face Behind the Smile. A cold wind swept through Thornway Hall that night, rattling the panes and whistling through the stone corridors. The guests retired early, murmuring among themselves in low, nervous tones. Whispers of secrets, suspicions, and sleepless thoughts hung in the air like fog. In the east wing, Poirot sat by the window in his private room, gazing down at the darkened gardens. The cuff-link lay on the table beside him, along with the old will, now sealed in an envelope marked Evidence. On a notepad before him, he had sketched a diagram of the manor. Rooms, passages, timelines, movements. The mystery was tightening, and Poirot could feel the pressure building. But as always, he waited. For people, if watched closely enough, will reveal themselves. The morning confession. That wasn't at breakfast. All the guests were subdued. Only Poirot remained composed, sipping his hot chocolate with evident pleasure. The others picked at their food, and glances darted like startled birds. At precisely 9 o'clock, Colonel Standish stood abruptly. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice clipped, "might I have a word in private?" Poirot nodded and followed him to the study. Once the door closed, the Colonel turned, jaw tight. "I'll speak plainly. I believe Drake was going to expose something about my time in India. There were rumors about a particular mission. Intelligence work. Things that, if made public, would cast doubt on my entire career." Poirot watched him carefully. "Rumors that were true?" The Colonel's mouth thinned. "I did what needed to be done. Nothing more." Poirot gave a subtle nod. "But you feared exposure?" "Yes." He alluded to it during dinner. A single sentence. "Sometimes history hides behind a moustache and a uniform." He smiled as he said it. He always smiled. Poirot folded his hands. "You were in the drawing room after dinner. Did you leave it?" "I stepped out for a moment. Around 10. Went to my room, then back. No more." Poirot arched a brow. "Then you did not go near the library?" "No." Poirot remained silent for a long beat. Then, "If you are innocent, Colonel, do not run from the shadows. They have long memories." The Colonel bristled, but said no more. He left the room with stiff shoulders and a clenched jaw. Poirot made a note. The crew in the music room later. That day Poirot wandered into the music room, drawn by a melody softly played on the grand piano. Lady Halberd sat at the keys, her fingers brushing the notes with mechanical elegance. The melody was disjointed. "Troubled? You play with sadness today, madam?" Poirot said gently. She looked up, startled. "Oh, I didn't hear you enter." Approached slowly. "Forgive me, I did not wish to interrupt. Music can be a confession of the soul, can it not?" She closed the lid softly. "There's too much silence in this house now." Poirot sat across from her. "And yet I feel you are not unused to silence. You have learned to speak less and observe more." Lady Halberd tilted her head. "What do you mean? You saw more than you have said. About Mr. Drake, about the night of his death." Her lips tightened. "I saw him whisper something to Julia Vale in the hallway around 10 o'clock. She looked furious, then frightened." "Did you hear what was said?" "No, but he leaned close. Too close." Poirot nodded. "Did you see her afterward?" "Yes. She fled to her room. I heard her crying through the wall." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You and she share a wall?" "Only at the corner. Enough to hear raised voices." Poirot stood. "Merci, Lady Halberd. That is most helpful." As he turned to go, she said quietly, "She's not as fragile as she appears." Poirot paused. "No, but perhaps more cornered than anyone realized." Interview 8. Julia Vale Poirot found Julia in the conservatory, standing alone among the ferns and orchids, her arms folded tightly around herself. "Miss Vale," he said softly. She turned slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed but defiant. "I know what you're going to ask."
"I know what you're going to ask," she said. "And yes, Lucien confronted me." Poirot remained silent, letting her speak. "He said he had a letter from my mother, dated before I was born. He said it proved that Everard wasn't my father." Poirot inhaled sharply. "Mon Dieu!" She nodded, hugging herself tighter. "He said he'd expose it unless I called off my engagement to Douglas and convinced Sir Everard to name him heir. And the letter, I never saw it. I stormed away, went to my room and locked the door." Poirot took a step closer. "And you remained there all night?" She looked away. "I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot." "But you wanted to silence him." Tears welled in her eyes. "If it's true about the letter, then my entire life is a lie. But if it isn't, then he was just cruel." Poirot studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he left her in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids and pain. Poirot's deduction by late afternoon, Poirot had reviewed all he needed. He requested Merton gather the guests once again in the drawing-room. They arrived, wary and silent. Poirot stood before them, as still and precise as a metronome. He tapped a folded piece of paper in his palm. "The original will, this document," he began, "is the heart of the motive, but not the only one." He looked at Douglas Thane. "You feared losing Julia, and perhaps your status, to Colonel Standish. You feared disgrace. To Dr. Linton, you feared your reputation would be shredded by association with Lucien's schemes. To Lady Halberd, you feared his affections, unwanted and perhaps once encouraged, would be exposed. And finally, to Julia, you feared the truth." Silence reigned. Poirot held up the cufflink. This placed Mr. Thane near the library, but it is not proof of murder, only presence. Poirot then pulled out another item, a folded paper found hidden inside a violin case in the music room. A second letter, from Julia's mother. It contradicts the first. She was married to Sir Everard before Julia was conceived, which makes the first letter Lucien claimed to possess a forgery. Julia gasped. He lied? Poirot nodded. Yes, he lied, because he intended to force Sir Everard into rewriting his will, and then blackmail each of you, using what scraps of information he had. Poirot walked slowly across the room. But he underestimated someone who had far more to lose than the rest. He stopped in front of Felix Linton. You, Doctor. Linton flinched. What? Poirot's voice was calm. You told us you were in the study all night, but your fingerprints were found on the inside latch of the library's side door. Linton paled. You and Lucien were once colleagues in Vienna. You funded one of his failed ventures, a pharmaceutical scheme that lost investors millions. When he returned to England, he used that knowledge to extort your silence. Poirot drew out a copy of a wire transfer receipt. This transfer from your account to one of Lucien's shell companies happened 2 weeks ago. Linton stammered. He said he'd tell the medical board. He said I'd never work again. Poirot's voice grew quiet. So you waited. You knew the library door could be unlocked from inside. You slipped in, confronted him, and when he refused to give you the documents, you struck him with the fireplace poker. A gasp rippled through the room. Poirot walked to the fireplace, removed the poker from its stand, and showed them the faintest trace of blood near the base. I imagine you tried to make it look like a fall, but the blow was deliberate. Linton collapsed into the armchair, burying his face in his hands. I just wanted to stop him. I didn't mean to kill him. I panicked. Poirot nodded solemnly. Murder is rarely born of cold intent, Doctor. It is fear, wearing the mask of desperation. Epilogue. Inspector Dallimore arrived by evening. Linton was taken into custody quietly, offering no resistance. The will was returned to Sir Everard, who, after much thought, burned both the original and the forged versions. I won't let a dead man rewrite the past, he said. Julia and Douglas left Thornway Hall together the next day, their future uncertain but no longer chained to lies. Poirot remained a final night, walking the halls in silence. The library, now empty, still held the scent of smoke and secrets. As he packed his valise, Merton approached with a package. This arrived for you, sir. No sender's name. Poirot opened it. Inside was a small book. The Nature of Smiles, with a ribbon marking the same underlined quote. On the back page, scribbled in Drake's hand, were the words, "If they ever find this, you'll know I knew." Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, Monsieur Drake, you knew, but knowing, alas, was not enough to save you. Chapter 5. The Widow and the Wound. The autumn mist clung to Thornway Hall like a second skin. With Dr. Felix Linton in custody, and the household slowly returning to its routines, a heavy hush had settled. And yet, Poirot, ever the hunter of threads, yet untied, remained unsatisfied. I have solved the murder, he said aloud to himself, as he stood before the fire in the drawing-room. Mais Was it the only crime? For there were questions that still prickled the back of his mind. Why did Lucian Drake smile that last evening with such calm certainty? What had he meant by, "You'll know I knew"? And what precisely had he known? Poirot's instincts, as ever, were rarely wrong. Something deeper remained, hidden beneath the surface of justice already served. A visit from the widow Halbert. That morning, Poirot requested a final conversation with Lady Imogen Halbert, the widow of Sir Hugo Halbert, Everard Vale's late cousin. She arrived at the drawing-room with her customary poise, tall, elegant, and dressed in deep violet. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, settling onto a settee with practised grace. "You asked to see me?" Poirot offered her a cup of tea, which she accepted without hesitation. "Lady Halbert," he said with that famous calm, "we know who killed Lucian Drake. Yet there remain shadows. I believe you can help me dispel them." Her eyes remained unreadable. "How so?" Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You were once quite close to Lucien, n'est-ce pas?" Her fingers paused on the teacup's rim. "We were acquainted. You were lovers." She blinked. "That is a strong word, but an accurate one." She said that she blinked. "That is a strong word, but an accurate one." She set the teacup down carefully. "We had a brief understanding. It ended long before his return." Poirot tilted his head. "Did it? I wonder. The letters found among his effects tell another story." He placed a small package on the table. 4 letters in Imogen's hand, intimate in tone, dated only months before Lucian's death. Her face paled. "Where did you find these?" she whispered. "They were concealed in a false drawer in Lucien's valise, along with a photograph of you, taken last spring, in Venice." She sat back, defeated. "He said he destroyed them." "He did not. Instead, he kept them. Perhaps to remind himself of your promises. Perhaps to use them later." Her voice hardened. "It was a mistake. I was lonely. My late husband, Hugo, had only recently passed. Lucien was charming, persistent, and I thought I was still capable of being loved." Poirot listened without judgment. "But he turned dark," she continued, "controlling. He hinted he might tell Everard about us. He said I owed him more than affection. He wanted influence." Poirot's voice was quiet. "Did he ever blackmail you?" "Not in so many words. But he didn't need to. Every visit, every note, it became clearer. He was waiting for the right moment to ruin me." Poirot regarded her gently. "And yet you didn't kill him." "No, I left him. I ended everything weeks before his return. I hoped he'd moved on." Poirot looked down at the letters. "You were not the only one he kept something over." Imogen rose slowly. "If you mean to expose me, do it. I am tired of silence." Poirot shook his head. "No, I merely wish to understand the man who smiled before he died." Julia's letter. Later that afternoon, a footman delivered a sealed envelope to Poirot. It bore no return name, only a hastily scrawled line, "For your eyes only." Inside was a single-page letter written in trembling ink. Poirot recognized the hand immediately. "Julia Vale, Monsieur Poirot. I have remembered something. The night Lucien died, I received a note, slipped under my door. I thought it was from Douglas. It wasn't. It said only, You are not your father's daughter. Ask the library. I was too afraid to go, but when I heard he had died, I knew he meant me to find something. Perhaps I should have said this earlier, but I wasn't ready. I am now. Julia Poirot reread the note 3 times. Ask the library, he murmured. Moments later, he descended the stairs and entered the dim, silent library. Dust still clung to the window ledges. The fireplace was cold. A few books remained strewn on the floor from the night of the murder. Poirot turned his attention to the shelves. Methodically, he searched volume by volume. Then, on the 3rd shelf from the floor, he found it. A slim, false-fronted copy of Byron's collected letters. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed and dry. Poirot opened it. It contained a birth certificate. Name, Julia Vale. Father, Hugo Halbert Poirot. Closed his eyes slowly. Ah, mon Dieu! A bloodline Benedict. It was nearly dusk when Poirot sat with Sir Everard Vale in the study. The old man looked more tired than before. You've stayed long past your time, Monsieur Poirot. And yet I must remain 1 night more. There is something you must see. He handed over the certificate. Everard took it, opened it, and sat very still. When he spoke, his voice was like dust. So, it is true. You knew, I suspected. Years ago, Hugo came to me. He begged forgiveness, said it was a drunken mistake. He and Elizabeth, my wife, had been close in youth. One night, just once, he said. Poirot waited. I never told Julia. I raised her as my own. I loved her more than I thought myself capable. Even when I suspected, I never wavered. Poirot nodded, and Lucien discovered this. Yes, I do not know how, but he said he would make it known, unless I named him heir. He was going to destroy her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. So you wrote the new will? To protect her? To delay him? To buy time? But he said it was not enough. Poirot said softly, You knew what he could do, but you did not kill him. No, but I feared someone else might. He reached into the desk and removed a second envelope. This arrived the morning after he died. Anonymous, but I believe you should read it. Poirot opened the note. Sir Everard, Lucien was evil. You know that now. What I did for Julia, for the girl who loved horses, who chased butterflies in the orchard, who called you Papa. You'll never know who I am. That's best. But she deserves better. He smiled when he died. He knew I would come. There was no signature. Poirot read the letter 3 times, then folded it gently. The final theory. That evening, Poirot walked alone through the orchard behind Thornway Hall, lost in thought. He had solved the murder by law, but the truth had bloomed beyond a single killer. Lucien Drake had built a castle of lies. He had threatened lovers, ruined reputations, and poisoned the well of legacy. And one by one, those around him had been driven to the brink. Lady Halbert had nearly sacrificed her dignity. Julia had teetered at the edge of identity. Everard had hidden the sins of others in the name of love. Felix Linton had crossed the line and paid the price, but Poirot now believed Linton's blow had not been fatal. No, someone else had come later, after the doctor left in panic. someone who had learned the truth and finished what the first blow began. Poirot could not prove it. There was no evidence, only intuition. But the letter, the careful phrasing, the handwriting just familiar, enough. Midnight revelation. At midnight, Poirot knocked gently on Douglas Thane's door. The young man opened it, eyes tired. "Monsieur Poirot, I must ask you one final question." Douglas nodded. "Of course." Poirot studied him. "How long have you known Julia was not Sir Everard's daughter?" Douglas stiffened. Poirot continued. "You found the birth certificate, perhaps by accident, or perhaps Lucien showed you, intending to drive you away from her." Douglas looked away. "I didn't care. She was always Julia. Nothing changed. That." Poirot nodded slowly. "But when you saw what Lucien planned, what he would do. Douglas's voice cracked. "He wanted to destroy her, for power, for pride. And he smiled, Monsieur Poirot. When I entered the library, he smiled, as if he knew I was already too late." Poirot's voice was barely a whisper. "You struck him." Douglas closed his eyes. "The doctor hit him first. I saw it from the hallway. But it wasn't enough. Lucien was still alive, still smiling. He looked up at me, and he said, 'You're too soft to stop me.'" Poirot said nothing. "I did it for her," Douglas whispered. "You can take me in. But know this, I don't regret it." Poirot looked down. "I believe," he said quietly, "that the law has its answer, and so do I. Good night, Mr. Thane." Poirot turned and walked away. Chapter 6. The smile in the mirror week had passed since the arrest of Dr. Felix Linton and the quiet departure of Hercule Poirot from Thornway Hall. Rain now fell steadily over London as Poirot sat in his modest flat on Whitehaven Mansions, sipping chamomile tea, the windows fogged with early evening chill. The fire crackled politely, order, precision, warmth. His small sanctuary had never felt more like a retreat. And yet his mind remained adrift. Lucien Drake's death was now officially solved. Felix Linton, already disgraced, had confessed to the fatal blow in a fit of panic and anger. He would likely serve a sentence reduced by extenuating circumstances and character testimonials. The newspapers were satisfied. Scotland Yard was satisfied. Even Sir Everard Vale had expressed thanks with a quiet, shaking hand. But Poirot, he was not satisfied at all. A smile that lingered. There was something about Lucien's expression in death that had haunted Poirot. People feared many things in their final moments: pain, regret, revelation. But Lucien Drake, for all his cunning and cruelty, had smiled, not a smirk of victory, nor the grin of a man who thought he might survive, but a knowing smile. A smile as if the last move had been his. Poirot had seen many faces of the dead. Anguish, surprise, peace, but rarely satisfaction. That alone had kept the little Belgian's thoughts spiralling long after returning to London. The envelope revisited on his desk sat the anonymous letter given to Sir Everard Vale, the one that read, "Smiled when he died. He knew I would come." Poirot now examined it with renewed scrutiny. The letter was untraceable, typed on a standard machine, printed on common paper stock, no postmark, no signature. But Poirot had not forgotten Douglas Thane's confession, nor the tremble in his voice as he recounted how Lucien had welcomed death. Why then did Poirot doubt it? Because there had been one more glass of port on the table that night. 3 glasses, not 2. Poirot remembered distinctly Lucien's, Sir Everard's, and one untouched, left at the far end of the table, as if meant for a third guest who never arrived, or one who did, and left no trace. A visit from Inspector Japp. Just as Poirot began pacing, a knock came at the door. He opened it to find Inspector Japp, soaked from the rain and holding a folded newspaper. "Evening, Poirot. Thought you might want to see this." Poirot raised a brow. "What a pleasant surprise. Do come in." Japp threw off his coat and handed over the paper. Bottom of page 7. Poirot unfolded it carefully and found the headline: Douglas Thane appointed head of Vale Foundation. Sir Everard Vale announced today that Douglas Thane, long-time family friend and business protégé, will lead the newly restructured Vale Foundation. Poirot read in silence. "Bit convenient, don't you think?" Japp said, pouring himself some of Poirot's tea without asking. Poirot didn't answer. Japp sat, watching him. "I know you think Linton didn't finish the job, but the Crown's happy with his confession. No physical evidence against anyone else. And Thane, he's clean. Not a single mark on his file." Poirot tapped his chin. "Yes, clean. But clean can be misleading." Japp chuckled. "You're not done, are you?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, Hercule Poirot is never done until the last thread is tied." A final walk through shadows. 2 days later, Poirot returned to Thornway, all unannounced. The leaves had fallen completely now. The trees were bare. The wind had a sharper bite, and the hall seemed even more ancient under grey skies. Sir Everard welcomed him at the door with a stiff embrace. "Monsieur Poirot, you are always welcome here, but I thought you'd completed your work." "I have, Sir Everard," Poirot replied. "And yet I must ask your permission to examine Lucien's effects one final time." Everard nodded slowly. "Of course, they're still in his room. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything." Poirot bowed and made his way to Lucian Drake's chamber. Inside, the room had been left almost exactly as it was. A faint musk of cologne still lingered. Poirot examined the wardrobe, drawers, and desk with meticulous care. But it was the fireplace that drew his attention. The ashes were long cold, but Poirot saw a small charred remnant at the edge of the grate. With tweezers he retrieved it, a huge sliver of blackened card, with the faintest trace of embossed lettering. He brought it to the window. The letters barely visible were gras, and the edge of a crimson wax seal. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Grrr, the Crimson Club. That evening, Poirot made a quiet visit to the Crimson Club, a private establishment known to serve the elite of Britain's old families. He requested a membership ledger. The concierge resisted until Poirot dropped the names of a few influential patrons and hinted at an investigation. He found what he needed: Lucien Drake, Douglas Thane, Hugo Halberd, all members, and intriguingly, so was Dr. Felix Linton. The Crown was more than just luxury. It was a network, a private gathering place where favors were exchanged and secrets carefully bartered. Poirot's mind began racing. What if Lucien had been planning more than just an inheritance play? What if he had intended to drag the entire Halbert Vale family into ruin through connections made here? Contacts, transactions, threats. The motive widened. Lucien had not simply blackmailed for money or favor. He had been constructing a coup, a systemic dismantling of reputation, legacy, and power. And perhaps someone close had realized this too late. Julia's realization. Back at Thornway Hall, Poirot found Julia Vale walking the gardens alone, bundled in a coat, her face pale but composed. "I thought you'd gone," she said softly. "I returned for the truth," Poirot replied, "and perhaps for peace." They walked for a time in silence before Poirot said, "Do you know what Lucien feared most?" Julia looked puzzled. "He never seemed afraid of anything." Poirot smiled faintly. "Exactly. But the one thing he could not control was love, the genuine kind. You and Douglas, that bond was beyond his reach, and he hated it." Julia nodded, her eyes misting. "He tried to poison everything." Poirot looked at her intently. "Did you ever suspect Douglas?" She hesitated. "No. But after you left, he changed, quieter. He doesn't look me in the eyes anymore." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Sometimes guilt does not scream. It whispers." Resolution in silence. Poirot never filed a report. He never called Jap again. He never told Sir Everard the full extent of what he'd found. Instead, 1 week later, he mailed a plain envelope to Douglas Thane, containing only 2 items: a photograph of the charred club card fragment and a note that read, "You stood between darkness and a girl who knew only light. The world is quiet now. Let it stay that way." Poirot never heard back. Epilogue. The Man Who Smiled Before He Died. Months later, in a quiet restaurant near Hyde Park, Poirot sat with Hastings, who had returned from Argentina on business. "So, the case is over?" Hastings asked. "Yes," Poirot said, slicing into his trout. "The murderer confessed. The others live in peace." "And yet," Hastings said, "you still look troubled." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Hastings, imagine a man who dies not with fear, but satisfaction. Because even in death, he believes he has outmaneuvered everyone." Hastings blinked. "You mean Lucien?" Poirot nodded. "Yes." He smiled because he thought he had corrupted everything, that his poison would linger. He paused. "But the greatest justice, mon ami, is that those he meant to destroy have chosen to live, not in fear, not in bitterness, but in truth. That is why I never said his name again in Thornway Hall. Let the dead have their silence." Hastings nodded slowly. "And the living?" Poirot smiled gently. "They will never forget, but they will endure." Chapter 7. Echoes and Embers. The winter in London thickened like a slow fog over the city's veins, muffling the rhythm of the streets and dulling the edges of memory. The case at Thornway Hall was finished, publicly at least, but Poirot, hewing the habit of quiet observation, watched how the echoes of the crime lingered like the scent of burnt paper long after the flame. Though he had said nothing to the authorities, nor formally named Douglas Thane as the orchestrator behind Lucian Drake's demise, the matter was far from gone in the corridors of Poirot's mind. He believed in justice, but also in balance, and sometimes balance demanded silence. A visit from Julia Vale one rainy afternoon. Poirot was surprised by a soft knock at the door of Whitehaven Mansions. "Julia Vale," she introduced, cheeks rosy from the cold, eyes filled with cautious warmth. Poirot stood aside. "Mademoiselle, what a pleasure! You are always welcome." She stepped in, removing her gloves. "I'm on my way to the continent. I sail tomorrow. Thought I'd see you before I left." Poirot poured her tea and gestured toward the fire. "Is this for business or for healing?" Julia smiled faintly. "A bit of both. I need time away, time to think, time to forget." Poirot sat across from her, fingers steepled. "Forgetting is the trick of the soul. Remembering, however, is the art of the heart." She nodded. "Douglas and I, we ended things. Or maybe we just left them unfinished. I still don't know what to believe." Poirot didn't reply at first. Then he said, "There are truths we carry because they help us walk, and truths we leave behind because they would make us fall." She looked at him. "Which was Douglas?" He smiled sadly. "Both. A letter from the past." After she left, Poirot returned to his desk. Among his mail was a package, unmarked, no return address. Inside, he found a worn leather journal wrapped in linen, with a note in elegant curved handwriting. "For your discretion, Monsieur Poirot, and your silence. You were never wrong, but you were kind. D. T." The journal, embossed with faint initials, was unmistakably Douglas Thane's. Poirot hesitated before opening it, but the curiosity, a hunger as old as his days in Belgium, overcame him. The Journal of Douglas Thane. The entries began nearly a year prior to Lucian's death. January 12th. "I fear what Lucien is capable of. He knows things that could ruin Sir Everard, destroy Julia, destroy me. But worse, he enjoys knowing it. He plays with knowledge, like a child plays with a match in a dry field." February 3rd. Lucien showed me a document today. A trust agreement. He has altered the Vale Foundation charter. If he dies, the remaining assets fall to the Foundation's operational head. A title he offered me today, while laughing. I declined. Of course I declined. March 21st. He told me over port, with that same sneer, that Sir Everard once altered military records to protect a comrade. He has letters, proof. If those letters were released, it would be the end of him. I begin to suspect Lucien knows he is hated, that he craves it, his death, when it comes, because I do not believe he expects to live long, will be deliberate. He will design it like a sculptor finishing his masterpiece. Poirot read with furrowed brow. June 7th. I believe he wants to die. Not by his own hand, no. He wants to be destroyed, murdered. He is shaping the conditions for it, testing us, provoking, offering the perfect moral rationale to eliminate him, and yet he smiles through it all. July the 14th. If he pushes Julia again, I will not restrain myself. This is not bluster. This is not impulse. This is inevitability. And finally, in a trembling script, August 29th, I saw the smile. The moment the blow landed, he was already gone. Not from the strike, but from the moment before, as if he had already stepped out of time, leaving a grin like a coat dropped at the door. Poirot closed the journal, the whisper of a confession. It was not proof, not by any legal standard, but it was truth. Poirot placed the journal in a locked drawer. He had no intention of using it. Sometimes the resolution of a case did not depend on prosecution, but on understanding the nature of evil and the capacity of human grief. Hastings returns to the case. In early January, Captain Hastings rejoined Poirot for a few days, bringing sharp winter air and his usual questions. "You've gone quiet since Thornway," Hastings said one morning over breakfast. "No new cases, not even a stolen jewel to occupy your little grey cells." Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. There are times when even the grey cells must rest, or reflect." Hastings lowered his toast. "But Lucien's case, it is resolved, yes?" Poirot sighed, leaning back. "Resolved in facts, not in feeling." "I never liked the sound of that fellow," Hastings muttered. "The type who toys with people, pulls strings and laughs when the marionettes fall." "Indeed," Poirot said, eyes distant. "But tell me, Hastings, when a man engineers his own destruction, and others oblige him, who then is the villain?" Hastings blinked. "The man who dies, or the one who lets him?" Poirot didn't answer. A letter to Sir Everard of the Abbaye de Jure, eve of the new year. Poirot penned a letter to Sir Everard Vale. "My dear Sir Everard, in this season of reflection, I write not as an investigator, but as a friend. You have suffered much, and yet I urge you to hold fast to one truth. Not every fire that burns leaves behind ash. Some leave seeds. You must rebuild not only the foundation, but the future for those who bear your name. Julia is strong, but she needs more than legacy. She needs hope. May the coming year offer peace and clarity. Yours, Hercule Poirot." He sealed the letter and sent it the next morning. The final clue. On January 10th, Poirot received a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a small item fell into his hand, a silver cufflink engraved with the initials LD and the symbol of a snake devouring its tail, an Ouroboros. Poirot froze. He had seen Lucien wear these only once. The symbol, a cycle of death and rebirth, had always seemed too theatrical for him. But there was something more. Wrapped around the cufflink was a note. "You once said the smile meant he had won, but perhaps he had simply accepted that he could not defeat us. The serpent ends where it began. The circle is broken. He will not smile again." No signature, no address, no trace, only an echo. Poirot's reflection. That night Poirot stood before his mirror. He examined his reflection. The impeccable moustache, the watchful eyes, the lines of time. Lucien Drake had died smiling. Douglas Thane had lived walking a razor's edge, and Julia Vale had chosen solitude over scandal. What had Poirot done? He had chosen silence, not because he feared truth, but because the truth sometimes cannot heal. It can only wound further. Poirot touched the cufflink once more and placed it in his desk drawer, beside the journal beside the letter. There are crimes of action, he thought, and then there are crimes of silence. But sometimes silence is the only justice that remains. Chapter 8. The Weight of Silence. The snow that January fell not in flurries, but in long, deliberate descents. London, blanketed under silence, seemed to exhale, its breath crystallizing in alleys and atop lampposts like quiet judgment. Hercule Poirot, though a man who usually preferred order to introspection, had not taken a new case since Thornway Hall. His files remained closed. His shoes, polished daily, rested untouched at the doorway. He was a man in waiting, though for what, even he did not yet know. It was on a dull grey morning, with the sound of the city still muffled beneath the weight of snow, that Poirot received a telegram, short, clean, calculated, from Scotland Yard, Re. Case File, No. DR 301. Lucien Drake, new evidence submitted anonymously. Request private audience. Inspector Jack Poirot rose, his spine straight as ever, and murmured only one word, enfin. The return to Scotland Yard. Inspector Japp was older now, not slower, but more burdened. The years had made him wary of brilliance, even when it wore a perfectly knotted tie and twirled a moustache. He greeted Poirot with a nod. "Glad you came. Didn't think I'd need to call you back into this one, but things have shifted." Poirot folded his gloves with surgical precision. The world, mon ami, shifts always. It is men who pretend otherwise. Japp waved toward his desk. 2 days ago, a parcel came in. No return. Inside, we found a copy of a recording, vinyl, accompanied by a single typed note. This is what he wanted remembered. Poirot's brows furrowed. "A recording?" he asked. Japp nodded. "Voice only. We had it transferred. Take a listen." He clicked play. A soft hiss gave way to Lucian Drake's unmistakable voice. "If you're hearing this, then I've succeeded. No, not in dying. That's incidental. I've succeeded in pushing them to reveal what they truly are." Veils dropped, masks shattered. That is the victory. Douglas always needed someone to rescue. Julia always needed someone to disappoint her. And Sir Everard, well, he needed a sin buried deeper than the others could find. Do not pity me. I arranged my fall with care. What they did, what any of them did, was only the final movement of a concerto I composed long ago. Poirot listened in silence, as the voice continued, its cadence like theatre, its tone unnervingly calm. "You see, truth has no virtue if left unsaid, and so I record mine. Even now, I imagine Poirot, sitting in some armchair, piecing my smile apart like a puzzle with missing corners. But here's what he won't say. Sometimes the man who smiles is not the villain. Sometimes he is merely the one who understands the game best. Goodbye, or perhaps, finally, hello." The recording ended with a soft click. Interpretation. Japp crossed his arms. "It's not a confession, not exactly, but it confirms he knew what was coming." Poirot nodded slowly. "A man who designs his own downfall, and ensures it is remembered. There is a kind of brilliance in it, twisted, but brilliance nonetheless. Do we reopen the case?" Poirot shook his head. "What would you charge? Suicide by manipulation? manslaughter by moral provocation. The law, Japp, is not a net wide enough to catch such ghosts. Japp sighed. So that's it then? No, Poirot said, rising. That is merely the echo. There is still the wound. A visit to Julia. The halls of the Vale Foundation had been repainted. New banners hung in the atrium. Julia Vale, though pale, carried herself with dignity. When Poirot entered her office, she did not rise, but her eyes softened. "You heard the tape?" she said. "Yes," he replied. It was inevitable someone would hear it. He made sure of that. Julia opened a drawer and handed him a folded letter. Poirot read silently. Hercule Poirot will understand. He always does. But don't ask him for peace, Julia. Ask him for memory. That's what he protects. L.D. He sent it to me a week before the incident, she said. I never opened it until today. Poirot looked at her. Do you feel anger? I did. Now I feel hollow. He robbed you of the illusion, Poirot said gently, of control, of moral clarity. He made each of you doubt yourselves. Julia's voice wavered. I don't know what that makes him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. It makes him a man. Flawed, brilliant, cruel. And now, gone. A shadow at the graveside. The snow was thick atop Lucien Drake's grave when Poirot arrived 2 days later. Few had visited since the burial. Even fewer had said his name. Poirot stood alone until footsteps approached from behind. It was Douglas Thane. They stood without speaking for a moment. Then Poirot said, You sent the cufflink. Thane didn't deny it. You feared that if no one remembered him, Poirot continued, he would have won. Thane's voice was low. He always wins, doesn't he? Poirot turned. Only if we let his memory remain only venom. Even serpents can shed their skins. Thane met his eyes. I left the foundation. I gave up the position Lucien had maneuvered me toward. Julia has taken over. Poirot nodded. Good. She will lead with clarity. Thane stared at the grave. I still see his smile, even now. Poirot stepped forward and placed a single white rose on the snow. Then remember that smile, not as victory, but as surrender. They parted in silence. Poirot's final record weeks later, in the quiet of Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot opened a blank page in his personal ledger. He recorded case, Lucien Drake, deceased manner of death, homicide by consequence, suicide by design, guilty parties, none by law, several by conscience, justice incomplete, but present. Verdict, a man who smiled not because he triumphed, but because he lost control and made the loss appear deliberate. He closed the book. There were no arrests, no trials, only memory, only silence. And in that silence, Hercule Poirot sat in his armchair, gazing at the firelight dancing across the cufflink in his palm. Its serpent etched eternally into itself. He whispered to the quiet, Some puzzles, mon ami, are not meant to be solved, only understood. Chapter 9. The eye of the labyrinth Whitehaven Mansions was unusually still. Poirot had not spoken to Hastings for 3 days, though his friend had dropped by twice. The detective's solitude was not melancholic. It was analytical. In his mind, the labyrinth of Lucien Drake's final days had yet to reveal its center. one could map a crime. But this was not a crime. It was a performance, a riddle with no question mark, only ellipses. That morning, as the sleet painted cold tears upon his windows, Poirot sat at his desk and reviewed the dossier again. Every note, every letter, every transcription of interviews, the tape, the cufflink, Julia's folded letter, and one oddity he had not mentioned to Jap, a second envelope. It had been slipped under his door the night of the burial, unmarked. Inside was a single typed message. If a man can orchestrate his own downfall, he can also leave behind a false bottom. Poirot did not know what disturbed him more, the cryptic message or the implication that Lucien's smile had been incomplete. Sir Everard's secret. The first clue came from an unlikely place, a cancelled estate sale. Poirot had learned, through a connection at Sotheby's, that Sir Everard Marsh had quietly retracted plans to liquidate several paintings. Works he had sworn under oath were his only remaining assets. Intrigued, Poirot requested a private meeting. Sir Everard did not welcome him warmly. "I had hoped this matter was concluded," he said, swirling brandy in a glass like it were courage. "Hope is for poets," Poirot replied gently. "I am here for the truth." Sir Everard smirked. "What more truth do you seek? The man is dead." "Exactly," Poirot said, "which makes his ghost all the louder." Everard said nothing. Poirot leaned in. "Where did the paintings go, Sir Everard?" "Not sold, clearly. And yet you claimed financial ruin. Lucien bailed you out. Why?" The older man flinched. "Just slightly." Poirot noticed. "I don't know what you're implying." "I am not implying. I am stating you owed Lucien Drake more than money. You owed him silence." Everard stood, abruptly, bracing himself against the mantel. "I don't need to answer that." "You don't," Poirot agreed, "but someone else will." He turned to leave. Sir Everard spoke before Poirot reached the door. "There were letters," he said. Poirot paused. "From years ago. Lucien somehow obtained them. Letters from me to a young student. Nothing illegal, but certainly compromising." Poirot nodded slowly. "So, Lucien did not merely assist you. He owned you." Sir Everard didn't reply. Julia's dilemma. Poirot next visited Julia Vale. She had grown paler, but more composed. She poured them both tea in her office, though her hands shook slightly. "Did Lucien blackmail Everard?" she asked without preamble. "Yes." Julia sighed, staring at the steam from her cup. Then he controlled staring at the steam from her cup. Then he controlled everything. Even now. Poirot tilted his head. "No, mademoiselle. Control is an illusion. Even Lucien, in his calculations, missed something vital." "What?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You," she blinked. "Me? You, who have changed since his death. You, who have not sought to defend or vilify him. You are the pivot." Julia looked down. "He left a final package for me. Said it was to be opened only when I made peace with his death." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Have you?" "No," she whispered. He did not press. Instead, he placed a hand on the parcel, resting on her desk like a buried mine. "When you are ready, mademoiselle. Not before." A visit from Hastings that evening. Poirot sat in his apartment with Captain Hastings, finally breaking his silence. "I must confess, old chap," Hastings said, sipping from a steaming cup, "this whole affair unsettles me." "Naturellement," Poirot replied. "It was designed to do so." But why? What could he gain by orchestrating such misery? Poirot stood and walked to the window. Lucien Drake was not seeking gain. He was seeking remembrance. He wished to burn bridges so brightly that no one could look away. But what does that mean, Poirot? He's dead. He can't see how anyone reacts. Poirot turned. "Ah, but mon ami, that is where you misunderstand. Lucien believed in legacy more than life, in the echo more than the sound." Hastings frowned. "Then we're playing into his hands." "Unless," Poirot said softly, "we choose a different melody." The final interview. Douglas Thane. Douglas Thane had retreated to a modest flat in Paddington. His appearance was leaner, his voice calmer. Poirot visited him at dusk. "You seem lighter," Poirot observed. "I'm not," Thane said, "just resigned." To what? To the fact that nothing Lucien said or did was without layers. Poirot nodded. "And yet the truth does not always lie beneath. Sometimes it is the one floating just above." Douglas gave a bitter laugh. "You think there's a simple answer?" "No," Poirot said, "but there is a simple intent." Handed Thane a copy of the anonymous message. "If a man can orchestrate his own downfall, he can also leave behind a false bottom." Douglas read it and paled. Poirot caught the reaction. "You've seen that phrase before." Douglas hesitated, then nodded. "In his notebooks, a week before he died." "I didn't understand it then." Poirot leaned closer. "What if Lucien did not intend to die that night?" Douglas looked up sharply. Poirot continued. "What if he was orchestrating guilt, but not death? What if someone accelerated the plan?" Douglas's face changed. "You think someone murdered him?" Poirot stood. "No, I think someone made a choice he did not expect." The puzzle. Within the puzzle back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot retrieved the notes. He lined them out on his table. Lucien Drake had staged everything. The betrayal, the exposure, the clues. But what if someone else had seized control in the final act, the second cup of wine, the moment the lights had flickered? The fact that Lucien's expression, just before collapsing, had been one not of triumph, but of surprise. Poirot whispered to himself, "You smiled, yes, but not because you planned to die. You smiled because you had forced them all to face themselves, but then you died." He picked up the original post-mortem report again. One anomaly. Traces of a second sedative, not consistent with Lucien's prescribed medication. It had been dismissed as residue from previous usage. Poirot now suspected otherwise. Someone had helped him into death. Not Lucien's will. Another's hand-dot conclusion of Chapter 9. Poirot now knew the truth hovered just beyond reach. The serpent on the cufflink had not only symbolized Lucien, it symbolized the circle of guilt, consuming itself again and again. But within that circle, someone had snapped the chain. Lucien Drake had planned a theatrical fall from grace, hoping to survive in memory. But instead, someone ensured he never rose again. And Hercule Poirot, the man who honored order above all else, now stood on the threshold of disorder's most terrible question. Who killed the man who planned to die? Chapter 10. The grand unravelling. The air in the drawing-room was heavy, filled with anticipation. The muted light from the chandelier above cast long, sharp shadows across the marble floors. The dozen or so people gathered. Sir Everard Marsh, Julia Vale, Douglas Thane, and the others stood rigid, their expressions a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Poirot had asked them all to gather. It was time for the curtain to fall, for the final move to be made in this intricate game of psychological chess. Hastings, standing by the door, shot Poirot a look of quiet understanding. The detective stood at the centre of the room, his gaze sweeping over the group. He didn't need to speak immediately. The silence was as loud as a thunderclap. They all knew this moment was coming, the culmination of days of careful manoeuvring, the slow peeling away of layers, the gradual shifting of motives. Poirot, always calm, his hands tucked neatly into the pockets of his jacket, broke the silence. "Pure Amos," he began, his French accent giving his words an added layer of gravitas. "We are gathered here today, not to speak of what we see, but of what we do not see." The group shifted nervously. Sir Everard gave a cough. Julia's hand trembled slightly as she clasped it in her lap. Only Thane stood stoically, his eyes locked onto Poirot, awaiting the inevitable. "The case, you see," Poirot continued, "is not as it appears. The pieces on the board have been arranged, but not by the hand of Lucian Drake, the man who smiled before he died." A low murmur rippled through the group. Sir Everard's eyes darted away, but Julia's gaze was unwavering, as if Poirot had opened a door into her mind that she didn't wish to enter. "I will not keep you in suspense," Poirot said, and then he smiled, his lips curling up just slightly, an expression that never failed to send a chill through anyone in the room. The true culprit, the hand that played the final card, was not Lucien. It was never Lucien. It was, in fact, you, Sir Everard Marsh. The gasps were audible. Sir Everard's face turned ashen, but he did not speak. He merely stood there, frozen, like a man caught in the jaws of a trap. Poirot continued, pacing slowly, his steps measured, as though he were an artist arranging a final piece. "You see, Sir Everard," Poirot said, his voice even and precise, "Lucian Drake was a man of complex motives. He understood psychology better than most. He was a master manipulator, a puppeteer who played with the strings of his friends, his enemies, and yes, even his benefactors. But his death, his supposed fall from grace, was no accident. He orchestrated it, but not as you all believed. No, he did not wish to die. He simply sought to make you believe that he would." Sir Everard shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. Julia's breath caught in her throat. She could not believe what she was hearing. Poirot halted and turned to face Sir Everard fully. "You, Sir Everard, were his greatest pawn, though you did not know it," Poirot said slowly, savouring each word. "The paintings, the debts, the letters, all were a smokescreen. Lucien had planned a fall from grace for you, but it would not have been enough to bankrupt you or ruin you outright. No, It was the public spectacle he craved, the exposure of your deepest secrets. Everard's lips parted, but no words came out. Poirot's eyes glittered with the thrill of the chase. Lucien understood that to truly destroy you, he must first make you believe in your own control. He fed you lies, convinced you that you were free, when in truth you were a marionette in his show. The letters to the young student, merely one piece. The paintings, another. Everything led back to your ego, Sir Everard. You wanted to be seen as the victim, and Lucien gave you that role. Sir Everard's breathing became shallow. "You're wrong," he whispered. "I am not," Poirot responded. "The clue was in the final days before his death. The smile you all speak of. It was not triumph, it was not relief. It was irony. Lucien had made you play your part, but then he knew you would turn on him." The room was silent again, except for the faint sound of Sir Everard's laboured breathing. Poirot paused for a moment, letting the words settle. The final reveal. Poirot's voice was calm and methodical now. "You see, Sir Everard, Lucien Drake did not die because of a simple revenge. He died because of greed. Greed that was not his own, but yours. Hastings, watching from the corner, understood what was coming. He had watched Poirot gather the pieces over the last few days, assembling a picture of psychological motives that only the great detective could see. Poirot's gaze moved to the others in the room. "Julia Vale," he said, turning to her, "you knew Lucien better than anyone else. But what you did not know was that your involvement in his life was part of his final scheme, one that was designed to make you feel both guilt and release. He gave you the power to absolve him, but the truth is that you did not absolve him. No, you became a part of the game, unwittingly playing your own part in Lucien's grandest trick." Julia looked at him with wide eyes, the realization dawning upon her. She had been a pawn, just as Sir Everard had been. "And Douglas Thane," Poirot said, turning to the last of the main players. "You, too, played a part. Your connection to Lucien was deeper than any of you realized. It was not out of friendship, but necessity. Lucien needed you to believe in his control. He needed you to believe that the truth could only come from him. But you, Douglas, were the most important witness of all. You saw the final piece before anyone else, that Lucien Drake had forsworn the very thing he had orchestrated. He had arranged everything to make you believe he was in charge, but all the while he was setting the stage for your personal failure, not his." Douglas Thane opened his mouth, but was unable to speak. Poirot's voice dropped to a soft whisper as he delivered the final blow. But the most important detail, the detail that none of you noticed, is that Lucien Drake smiled before he died, not because he knew his death was imminent, but because he knew his plan would succeed. The irony, you see, is that he left no one in control. The culprit. Poirot paused. Everyone was tense. Their eyes were locked on him, waiting for the final answer. Poirot took one last step towards Sir Everard. The true murderer, the one who killed Lucien Drake in that final moment, was not a simple case of passion or betrayal, Poirot said, his voice steady. It was a calculated decision made by none other than you, Sir Everard Marsh. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Everard's breathing. His lips trembled as he tried to speak. Lucien was going to expose you, to ruin everything you held dear," Poirot continued. "You had no choice in your mind but to act. You poisoned his drink that night, just as Lucian had poisoned you with his lies for years." Sir Everard collapsed into the chair behind him, his face pale, his mind racing. Poirot stood for a moment in the silence, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. Then he turned to the others. "I must leave now," Poirot said, his tone final. "But remember this. Lucian Drake was a master of deception, and so are we all, in the end. His final game was not about death. It was about legacy." With that, he exited the room, leaving behind a group of stunned individuals, each of them now forced to face the truth that they, too, were victims of the man who smiled before he died. Chapter 11. The Aftermath and the Quiet Reflection. The case of Lucian Drake had come to a close. The fine threads of deception had been untangled, and justice, however bittersweet, had been served. The day after Poirot's revelation, Sir Everard Marsh was taken into custody. Julia Vale, the daughter of the late philanthropist, was left to pick up the pieces of her fractured life, while Douglas Thane, his role in the tragedy now exposed, quietly retreated into his own thoughts, forever marked by the events he could never undo. Hercule Poirot had, as always, done his job with a precision that could only come from a mind honed by years of observing human nature. And yet, as he sat alone in his modest London apartment, looking out over the bustling city, he couldn't shake the feeling that the true victory was not in solving the crime, but in the quiet, inward satisfaction of having caught the subtle intricacies of the human heart. The reflection. The sunlight poured through the window, casting a golden hue over the carefully arranged items on Poirot's desk.